Hello and welcome to another bright and shiny edition of the UK Column Live. I will be your host today. The weather as usual is looking fantastic, beautiful and sunny if you live above the clouds, and we're here today with another fun-packed show. How are you doing, Brian?
Extremely well. In fact, we'll be coming back onto the subject of the weather and what's happening in the climate as our final article today, which
right.
I think will be quite interesting to viewers and listeners. It's great to have you back. What have you been up to?
What have I been up to? Well, I've actually been up to some really interesting things. I've been looking in the spirit of what's going on in the world, looking at naming names, actually. I've been looking at cross relationships between intergovernmental departments and massive corporations like Monsanto and Lockheed Martin.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about American governments. I'm talking about British governments and their sort of relationships. And I'm just really looking at the names that are involved and finding that there are some particularly key names that are involved in a lot of initiatives
Right.
that I think our viewers and that will be interested in.
Yeah.
At the moment, the research is early days. I wouldn't want to jump too early and start naming names now until I'm absolutely concrete in what I found. But I think I found some very interesting stuff.
And we're getting a lot of help from the public at the moment. More people are coming forward to speak and also to present their own research. We're discovering that there are many people who've been working really hard for years.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they've not been able to get their information out in the public domain.
Yeah. And it's always really good. I've had a couple of emails come in this week. It's always really good when people share their research so that we can make ties and we can make friendships and work together on what is a very difficult job to actually disseminate the web that's basically entangled politics and sort of family lives.
Yeah.
I think.
Okay, excellent. Well, Mike, I know you're champing at the bit to get going with what's been happening, particularly over the last few days. So what have you got for us?
Well, last night, the gatekeepers were out in force. Channel 4 News was typical of this. We had Jon Snow, we had Michael Crick, we had Porrick O'Brien, all putting huge amounts of effort into telling us that the paedophile scandal is all in the past. We've been told that we're being hysterical. We're being told it's a witch hunt, that it's anti-gay. And they said these things in their commentaries, and they also had several interviewees during the program to reinforce that message. One guest suggested that anybody commenting on this on the internet is a conspiracy theorist, and that we're hyping up the issue, and that people that are doing that are in fact conspirators themselves. Well, I would say yes, we are conspirators. We are involved in a conspiracy to expose the crimes of this elite, which is running this country. We're trying to expose what they're doing in the dark. So I would say I am involved in a conspiracy, and I am involved in that in the expectation, and not the desire, but the expectation that no one else will have to suffer in the way that some people have up till now.
Yeah.
But everywhere we look, and beyond this, the sort of paedophile scandal in the mainstream media, the headlines are all about tension. They're about rage. They're about fear. And they're sort of warning us about things. And the mainstream media is stoking up stress in the general population as fast as they possibly can. They're not providing any solutions, of course, and what they're really aiming to do is to have everybody clamoring for the government to do something. So it's real problem, reaction, solution. And it's not just something. They're really encouraging people to desire anything, that get any solution that gets thrown at them without any kind of consideration as to what that solution might entail. So they're expecting government to provide the solutions.
Yeah.
But there are no solutions in the present political and financial elite. They are psychopaths, and it is a psychopathic mindset that abuses children. But it's the same psychopathic mindset. Sorry, the slides are going a bit mad here. It's the same psychopathic mindset which murders innocent people in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's the same psychopathic mindset that sells
Should we?
Just next slide, please, Brian. It's
Okay.
the same psychopathic.
As we always say, we know when it's a good show, so we just move on to this next one. Yeah.
It's the same psychopathic mindset that sells arms to tin pot dictatorships in the Middle East. It's the same psychopathic mindset that
Yeah.
promotes the production of drugs in Afghanistan. And it's the same psychopathic mindset that launders the money. And it's the same psychopathic mindset that pays millions of pounds to hospitals in order to kill us instead of heal us. So I'm not saying that these people are paedophiles. I'm not even saying that these people are covering up paedophilia, although it does seem to be the case that they are. They seem to be running around like headless chickens at the moment, trying to impose a cover-up on this whole thing. But I am absolutely saying that these people are criminals, because at the very least they're part of a government, or have been part of governments, which have resulted in the deaths of millions of innocent people. They're supporting arms in foreign countries. They're threatening foreign heads of state that if they don't step aside, they'll be murdered. These people are criminals. They've installed themselves at the top levels of our society, and they seem to have employed people to go to sit alongside them that have the same kind of mindset. So there's only one solution to this problem, I believe, and it begins with a universal recognition by everyone in this country, just of the true natures of the people that we have running the country. They can only do what they do with our consent, and so I'm saying today, again, we must withdraw our consent from these people, and we must do it firmly. These people are criminals, and it's time for them to be taken to book and to task for what they've done.
Yeah.
What do you think, Mike, would be a good way for people to withdraw their consent? Because I know we talk about it a lot, but a lot of people seem to get confused about how they can actually properly withdraw their consent.
Look. This, we have said this many, many times. This is a numbers game, and so it doesn't matter what us as individuals do. We can all choose things to withdraw our consent as individuals in so many different ways, whether it be simply not paying TV license or not paying tax or whatever the mechanism of withdrawal consent is. It doesn't really matter. The biggest job that we have to do at the moment is to encourage everybody in this country to recognize, get their heads out of the sand, recognize what is going on, and en masse we've got to withdraw our consent. So this is we have got to educate and waken people up, get people prepared to act, and get together in any way that we can to give other people the courage to do those things. And that's the key problem. People are scared, and we've got to give people the courage to stand up.
Well, I think by standing together, standing
Yes.
together is how we get rid of the fear, because it's much harder to intimidate a group of people as it is as individuals.
Well, I can just add to this that last night I was speaking on Liberty Radio in Monterey, California, with Dr. Stan Monteith. Dr. Stan, wonderful man who is busy trying to get out the truth and information to the American public. And at the end of the hour's conversation, we touched on this very subject of how do we actually get people to move, and the business of reinforcing each other, getting people to work together in small groups with friends, with teams. We don't need a big organisation. We need people just to be getting out there and supporting each other, and stay within the fields that people feel comfortable in, or indeed they're knowledgeable in. And we came to the conclusion the situation in Britain and America very similar at the moment, that we've now got more and more people who are asking this key question: what on earth is going on in the country? What is happening politically? Why are we seeing this chaos? We discussed the complete breakdown of society and the economic system. So I was being asked, well, what is the situation at the moment with British hospitals? We hear that people are being paid money to actually allow people to die, which of course is quite correct. There's no conspiracy theory. It's reported in the mainstream press. So we were talking about that. We were talking about the dumbing down of education. And we're saying that manufacturing is stripped away, shipbuilding's gone, the car industry's gone, the steel industry's gone. Yep. This isn't accidental, it follows a pattern. What are we going to do about it? Well, we've got to tackle the people that are clearly causing the problem, and that is, in our case, anti-British MPs. In America, it's quite clear that the American people have just been bamboozled into electing a president who is going to basically, I believe, enact the Patriot Act, and we're going to see a dictatorship forming in America. Yep. So we've got to speak out, haven't we, really?
I think so, and I think that the speaking out is actually the shining a light, and that's the important thing, is that these people all work in the darkness. And when I mean shining a light, I don't mean that etherically or anything like that. It's simply we get people to look at it, because by people looking at it, that is shining a light on it. And it makes it much harder for them to do it. But then, of course, once we've got that critical mass that we always talk about, then as we have to take action, there has to be real action in that. What that is at this moment in time, I don't think any of us can say, because we don't know what's going to be happening at that time. But I think that there will come a time where talk has to stop and action has to start. But right now, I'm not 100% sure that that's the moment. Now it's just the simple thing to do what we're all doing, or desperately trying to do, which is to get out there, talk to people, show people what's going on in the world that they quite don't seem to have a grip on. And and I think exposing it that way.
Absolutely. I'll just pick up, sorry Mike, have you got something to add on that? Or, we're just come in, of course, underpinning everything at the moment, we've still got all this bit about the accusations of paedophiles. I'm going to come on to some comments that have been made by the Mail columnist, Little John. But basically here we've already got, with this Guardian article, the blurring of the edges of what's going on. We know that we've had hundreds of children abused through the so-called care system. We know that children have been taken out of care homes to be abused. Most recently, that's of course happened in Oxford, where paedophile gangs were actually taking young girls out of supposedly safe care environments. But here we now see the mainstream press starting to blur the edges, and the Guardian here, I think this is disingenuous article talking about mistaken identity, which led to a top Tory abuse claim. I know you've looked at this one a little bit, Malcolm.
I had a little bit of a look, yes, and basically the general gist is that Measham has accused McAlpine of abuse, but what the story has come out in the Guardian today is that there's a mistake, as the title says, there's a mistaken of identity. And what the story is saying is that basically Measham has identified that his abuser was called Tom and that his abuser is also dead, which is basically pointing to saying that Lord McAlpine isn't the perpetrator. But it's interesting that the finger has been pointed to another member of the McAlpine family called Jimmy McAlpine. And this is where my point would really come in, because Jimmy McAlpine was basically sitting on the board of the England builders Alfred McAlpine Limited. And he was obviously a very wealthy man because he collected vintage cars, and at one point it was considered that he had the largest collection in the UK. So he's obviously a very wealthy man. And my point is that, of course, we don't want to go on a witch hunt. I kind of do agree with David Cameron on that, but of course I think he's deflecting. But I do agree with that point. We don't want to go on a witch hunt. But it does seem that this is still pointing to elite circles. It's still pointing to an elite family. It's still pointing to people who are operating within those circles, and of course will have relationships with other elites, which is exactly what I'm finding with my research, is that you pick one man out of a company like Monsanto or out of a large multi-million earner, and you look at his affiliates, and they have broad affiliates across the whole spectrum. And I would suggest, although of course at this early stage it would be hard to be absolutely sure, but I would suggest that really is the point here, is that we're still talking about elite circles.
Well, the other thing is the press are simply not printing the information that's being made available to them. While you've been talking there, a name comes into my mind. The lady's name is Teresa Cooper. She was one of a number of mainly girls, but young teenagers who were horrifically abused in a care home. and that was actually run by the church. And when she came out of that organisation, even though she had full evidence, she had the medical documents which showed that she and other children were sedated, unconscious, in order to be raped and abused over a period of time. There was corroborating witness statements. All of the evidence was there, and when that lady, as just one example, went forward to the police, when you would have thought that this whole thing would have been instantly investigated, what happened was the usual wall of silence. And she was one of a number of very brave people that fought and fought. What do they eventually get? They get compensation, but they actually don't get justice because nobody is brought forward. If people want to follow up themselves, the book they need to find is Pinned Down. It's called Pinned Down by Teresa Cooper. But here we are as alternative media with UK Column and UK Column Live. Our telephone rings and we are being told in case after case after case about children being taken either through the care system or within paedophile type rings. And what is the action from the establishment? It is absolutely zero. In Oxford, and we've kept pushing this, on David Cameron's doorstep, we have had report after report from victims with statements and corroborating testimony of horrific abuse at Oxford and Cherwell Valley College. No full investigation by Thames Valley Police. We've got people connected to David Cameron's election agent sitting on child safeguarding boards, and no action is taken. So we got the mainstream press suggesting that this is conspiracy theory. You've taken some of the phone calls yourself, haven't you?
Sure,
from
no,
others?
I absolutely, yeah, and police officers as well. I've taken them from broad spectrums,
Yeah.
and you're absolutely right. It's the same story every single time. The details are slightly different, the hows and the whats and the wheres, but it's the same story, the same methods, the same techniques being administered.
Yeah.
You know, which generally is to attack the parent that is that's defending the child, and if there's a couple, you split them up. If they're not split, then you prey on the fact that they're arguing, and you know, it might not be in a court, it might be somewhere else, but you prey on that. Whatever weakness they can get to, they will prey on it just to find an excuse.
So the elite cover is to effectively say, no, the paedophile activity is all people at the bottom end of the social class. Yeah. And the moment the finger is actually pointed up the ladder, then here we have the press being unleashed. Yeah. And here's Little John from the Daily Mail, and I encourage people to go and read this article. It's really quite incredible. I just mentioned David Cameron here briefly because, of course, he got a bruising from going live on TV when Mr. Schofield presented him with a list which is freely available on the internet, and if people read it, I think they will be quite surprised at how candid and accurate information is. But of course, this is what David Cameron said in his response. We're a civilised democratic society under the rule of law, with a police force, with a justice system. And yet we are seeing in case after case people reporting that within the family courts there is false testimony, false representation by experts. Basically, there is no justice inside the family courts. No. And does David Cameron understand this? Of course he does. So we're civilised and democratic. Well, I think we're going to move on to a bit of that by having a look at Syria.
I think it's actually a very interesting comment that he would make because, you know, we're a civilised democratic society. Well, we know what's been going on in the Middle East and places for pushing democracy on people, which isn't democratic at all. We live under the rule of law, which whenever I've, you know, put difficult questions towards like chiefs of police and so forth, that's what I get back. But the interesting bit is we live with a police force. We live with a force. Yeah. So if people don't play the rules, we'll force them to do it.
Yeah, these are not constables that are actually looking after after individuals and society and protecting us. This is part of the government's police force. Force
us to do it. And then, as you say, when the fingers turn the other way, silence.
Yeah, absolute silence. Well, of course, we'll remember the famous quote from Senator Sevray from Jersey, who said that governments love paedophilia because paedophilia is the means by which people can be controlled for the political agenda. But if I give a couple of quotes here from Mr. Littlejohn, he said that he's saying that Schofield fancies himself as the next Jeremy Paxman, but Paxo would never pull such a crass stunt. If he planned to ambush the Prime Minister, he'd make sure his facts were copper-bottomed, not lifted off some crazy conspiracy website. Well, our response to that is if Mr. Littlejohn would actually get himself out of his comfortable office and onto the ground and start talking to victims who've either been abused by paedophile rings themselves or their families who've seen the suffering and abuse in their own families. Our challenge to Mr. Littlejohn today is, have you ever spoken personally to some of the victims of these paedophile rings? Have you any idea what these people actually do to children in order to get them to indulge in these practices? We would guess at the moment, Mr. Littlejohn, that you have absolutely no idea of how deep this paedophile scandal in UK is and how far and close to the top of the elite and the establishment in Westminster it goes to. We believe the truth is going to come out. But of course he goes on to say more. He starts to take the mickey out of the MP, Mr. Watson, and he says that he's appointed himself as the nonce finder general. So here we have an MP who's brave enough to stand up in Parliament and actually speak out about paedophiles, and that MP, I know, has been stunned at the hundreds of emails and other calls that he's had providing information, but Littlejohn can do nothing but attack. He calls for a sense of proportion. The BBC has taken complete leave of its senses. This week, a repeat episode of Only Fools and Horses was pulled from the schedule. So what is this man doing? Does Littlejohn actually know what's going on? And is he part of an establishment cover-up? Or has he simply taken leave of his senses? I think we're going to have to wait to see. Mr. Cameron, press laws, you picked this one up as well.
Well, just a very quick one, that Caroline Spellman, Malcolm Rifkin and Lord Fowler and some others have basically come out and they believe that basically we need to bring in new laws to curb press excesses. It doesn't really come as a shock to any of us who have been following the story and the Leveson inquiry and who's involved in the Leveson inquiry,
Yep.
and what groups are participating. So it doesn't really come as a shock, but I think essentially what they're talking about is leading towards a state-controlled paper, similar to China, I think, where the state controls all the media that we see and all the stories that we hear, which I think is an incredibly dangerous path to walk. If we were talking about a government or a state that was, very charitable to its people, that actually had the welfare of its people in mind, then I would be fine with that, actually. I don't think it's a bad idea. But I think that having seen the stories that are breaking recently, and having written and read many of the stories that we've been publishing, I don't think this has got anything to do with protecting the public at all.
No.
In fact, I think it's about protecting the elite from the public.
Yeah. Well, of course, we've got to remember the basics, which is that Mr. Cameron appoints, I think, a chum, which is Mr. Leveson, to run this inquiry. Cameron has already expressed his total disdain for the thing because ordinary people have to provide information to the Leveson inquiry, but of course Cameron has been withholding private texts, which clearly he doesn't really want to go into the public domain.
Yeah.
So it's total hypocrisy, but if we get control of the press, and certainly if they get control of alternative media via the internet, then we're going to be in very, very dangerous water.
I mean, I think just before we move on, I'd probably say that I would imagine that a lot of the press is already controlled anyway by various people holding various positions, I would suspect.
Yeah.
But I think this is more of a rubber stamping exercise to kind of formalise what has already been going on and probably is continuing to go on. But it's a rubber stamping exercise to sort of codify it and bring it into statute.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
I would imagine.
Yeah. Well, we thought we would just stay on the subject of Mr. Cameron because, of course, as far as the media is concerned, Mr. Cameron is the only person who runs Britain. But whilst we have seen this amazing exposure of the paedophilia at the heart of the British establishment, David Cameron goes on a private publicity exercise. So this was a picture that he released of himself chatting to Obama after the American elections, and we presume that this image was designed to show Mr. Cameron in the light of being a intelligent, calm, solid statesman. So we've seen him panicking on TV when he's asked about paedophiles in the Tory government, but what he likes to project, because this is all part of the ego, is that here he is as the cool, calm man. Which is the real man? Is it the man in the mirror, or is it the man sat behind the desk? Well, we don't know, but we'll work on that. But this is how David Cameron really sees himself. And this article from The Guardian I found stunning because of the picture. Here's David Cameron standing on top of the world, surveying Syria. And the headline is, "Should the ban on arming Syrian rebels be lifted?" And it says, British officials have said they will put every possible measure to unseat the Syrian president, Mr. Assad, back on the table. So here is the civilized democratic nation that David Cameron's been speaking about earlier. And now when it comes to Syria, we're going to do everything possible to unseat a head of state. Is this law or international law? Is it lawful under international law? Or have we got a terrorist act working here?
Well, I suppose actually, if I could just bring
Please,
this in really
please
quickly,
do.
because
The show is very interesting this Friday because we're having a few technical problems. So please.
Well, I think it's interesting because what we're talking about here, we're talking about funding terrorism, right?
Yeah.
And terrorism is basically creating terror for a political gain. Okay,
Yeah.
so I would say, and I think many people would argue, that by giving rebels weapons and sending them into a country, you're basically arming terrorists, and you're sending them in to do terrorist work.
Yeah.
There's another interesting story that's come out today about Andrew Mitchell, and basically how when he was moved over to party whip before he made his rant to the police, he basically backtracked on a decision to fund the Rwandan government. The Rwandan government has come into a bit of controversy because they fund how do I describe it? I suppose terrorist groups. They fund terrorist groups rebel group like M23. And M23 basically has been blamed for obviously mass killings and also the rapings and stealing of people. And if we go back to what was happening in Rwanda not only a decade or so ago, the whole primary thing that they were doing was going around and stealing children. They were committing genocide. Now I find that really interesting because Andrew Mitchell now has backtracked on a decision not to pay the Rwandan government by giving the Rwandan government £8 million. And I think that's a bit of a controversy since he did that in the remaining hours of his secretarial post before he went to party whip. And I've also, in another paper, it mentions that basically the government plans to give another approximately 83 million between now and 2015. And I just want to ask the question, why are we funding terrorist initiatives? We're funding the attack on Syria, which is a terrorist initiative, and now we're funding a Rwandan government which is known to give a portion of its money to a known terrorist outfit.
Well, it's a really good question. I think the quick answer to that is that we've got a psychopathic government. That's the first thing. And of course, what is happening in Africa is that a regionalisation plan is unfolding, and this is the breaking up of Africa into regions to actually fit with the one world government agenda. People might like to check this, but you find it's absolutely correct. And of course, under the plan, the ultimate plan for the European Union, not only is Russia to be brought in, but Africa is to be part of the European Union. So we're not only giving money to the European Union with no audited accounts, we're also giving it for rebels here. We've stuck on the subject of Syria. I've got an eye on the clock. The Sun, lots of credit to the Sun because they really picked up on the nub of the problem. So here was their article saying that Cameron was to arm Syrian rebels bid. And they then had some very interesting quotes. So here's Prime Minister David Cameron, and if we look at a little bit of what he says, it's quite interesting. It redoubles my determination that we have to do more. What we've done for the last 18 months hasn't been enough. The slaughter continues, the bloodshed is appalling, and also there is the humanitarian crisis engulfing Syria. Now, forgive me, but hasn't it actually been Cameron and the British government that's been helping to stoke up what's happening in Syria? So we can take the quotes a bit further. So Mr. Cameron goes on to say, let's work on pushing what more we can do to hasten the end of this regime. He doesn't talk about stopping the bloodshed. What he says is we've got an agenda to topple the Assad regime and we're going to work on it. And we can finish off, because he thinks it's perverse that Iran and Russia can arm Assad's forces while Britain can't supply rebels. So Mr. Cameron has now got British officials examining if the EU embargo on arms can be broken as the death toll reaches around 37,000. So I read into this that Mr. Cameron is not happy that he hasn't managed to topple Assad yet, and he needs to pump in some more arms so that he can ultimately be responsible for the deaths of maybe another 10, 20,000 people. Right. It's just incredible to watch. And we are talking real casualties. Credit to Peter Beaumont from The Guardian, because in this article, which is going back the 10th of August, but I think it's become more relevant, more pertinent now, what he was demonstrating was that the rebels that Tony Blair is very keen British taxpayers' money should fund were actually involved in atrocities, torture and murder themselves. Finally, we move on to the interesting subject of the weather, and it was brought to our attention locally that the BBC was out posting little posters saying they were concerned with the floods which had taken place in several locations in Devon over the last few weeks. And as this poster said, the BBC's meteorologist Nick Miller will explain the science behind this year's unprecedented floods with the help of his big inflatable planet Earth prop. So we have the situation that the BBC is riddled by child abuse and paedophiles. The BBC can't investigate that properly, but we understand that teams are out across UK at the moment looking into flooding and other severe weather with the help of an inflatable world prop.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to add that there was in the back of a paper today was talking about the government's climate department spending £1.5 million on flights. I think it was over the last 12 months. I have to go check that yourselves. But yeah, right. 1.5 million, and it was of course first class and business class. So I just thought that was ironic that that was a climate department spending £1.5 million on plane flights.
Absolutely. Well, we think the BBC is probably up to a new scam on global warming. This is just a picture from their website about Nick Miller himself. He's a very interesting man because he's a professional weather reporter. It says that he was trained in the weather for 3 years, but his career is actually in reporting the weather. He's been working in America. He's been congratulated on looking at floods in Indian reservations. I'm told by locals in the Devon area that there are not too many Indian reservations around Yelton. But we get a clue for what's going on because here is The Guardian, and what The Guardian is saying is that there is more coming to push us or try to push us towards the fact that there is a massive change in global warming. And of course, in global climate and global warming, we now have seen more and more scientists, thousands of them in fact, saying that this is a scam. So well done, the BBC. We think you're heading back into stormy waters there. Anything to finish on, Malcolm? Or?
I don't think I have anything to add about climate change, really, to be honest, because I'm pretty much in the side that I don't necessarily think that it's man contributed as being made out by the media. I certainly think we're poisoning our planet, which is not going to help us. Don't want to be cutting down trees and all of these things, but I don't think that greenhouse gases are responsible for it. That's my opinion. Okay,
thank you for that. Well, thank you all for joining us today. I'm sorry that we've had a few technical issues. I would just say that we have been working to upgrade some of the technology we have to help our live broadcasts and to enable more people to join the programs we're doing. So thank you very much for the emails and texts of support, and we will have an improved system in the very near future. I'd also like to encourage people to visit our website later this evening, when you'll be able to download yesterday's 2-hour program, which was looking at the topic of paedophilia and also getting to the bottom of the truth about the abuse of Down syndrome girl Holly Gregg. So if you've any doubts about the veracity and truth of that case, please do look at our 2-hour documentary from yesterday, and I think you will be both surprised and shocked at what we have to say. So thank you very much for joining us. It's goodbye from us in the Plymouth studio.
Goodbye.